Nigeria, the pulse of fashion, music, art, and any other aspect of life that is culturally relevant. Home to over 186 million people in the country alone, Nigeria serves as a place of identity to approximately 371 different indigenous ethnic groups. With such wonderful diversity amongst Nigerian people, both at home and in the diaspora, there is a variety of Nigerian phenotypic compositions. This diversity is truly beautiful when all Nigerians' physical features are treated equally. However, the issue of colorism, the act of prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone and or less Eurocentric features typically amongst people of the same ethnic or racial group, prevents Nigeria as a whole from attaining this level of self-love and appreciation. To gain more of a personal perspective on how colorism affects Nigerians in Nigeria and in the diaspora, I decided to probe the minds of 5 Nigerian Stanford students. Here are their lived experiences and perspectives on Nigerian colorism.
My name is Olukemi Lejadu. I am Yoruba. I am from Lagos, Nigeria, and I have lived in Lagos, the UK, and now in California.
My name is Adekunle Awojinrin. My tribe is Yoruba, and I lived in Nigeria up until the age of 4. I've also lived in Indiana, in the state of Maryland, and I currently reside and cohabitate between California and the state of Maryland.
My name is Agachukwu Chiamaka Gali. I'm Igbo from Anambra State, and I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, but grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, unfortunately.
My name is Chiamaka Kenneth Ogwebu. I'm Igbo. I am from Hyattsville, Maryland, and I've spent most of my life in Maryland, but I've lived in Georgia and Cobb County, and also spent some time, like 2-ish years when I was a toddler, living in Imo City, Nigeria.
My name is Blessing Edom. I'm a Birio from Akwa Ibom State, but I was born and raised in California.
The first encounter with colorism in Nigeria, growing up in Nigeria, was to do with hair, actually. I remember from a young age watching adverts on television for hair products, and the girl, if there was going to be representation of black people, the girl was always light-skinned with loose curls. And I remember being disappointed I remember there was a L'Oreal product I saw an advert for on TV, and I saw the way the girl's hair looked, and I told my mom, like, oh, I want this shampoo, I want this conditioner, blah, 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 when we went to the supermarket. And, we got the shampoo, we got the conditioner, I washed my hair, and it was still, kinky. Can't remember how old I was, but I was quite young, and I guess that was my first encounter with colorism.
So within the Nigerian context, I'll describe specifically the Yoruba context. In Yoruba, there's a word for black or dark-skinned people, which is dudu, and there's a word for lighter complexion people, which is pupa. And I think my first exposure to that is just like watching Nigerian movies with my grandmother, and seeing how the main character, the archetypes of the films usually preferred lighter skinned women over those of darker skin, and usually seeing the darker skinned actors playing the role of the house helps, or just general servants. So definitely within the cinematographic context is where I first understood and began to internalize colorism in a Nigerian context.
I was born. That was my first encounter, quite frankly. And then I think having sisters who we all had different, varying shades of melanin, and then we all darkened differently as well. So then there was always this competition of, oh, why can't you be lighter than this one? Oh, you're getting dark, or blah this, blah that. You need to not be in the sun as much. So Yeah, just being born in a Nigerian context, I think, exposed me to colorism.
So I would say in high school, so I went to a pretty diverse high school, and there was a fairly large Nigerian population. Um, but I felt like it was similar to Stanford in that the Nigerian community and the Black community kind of melded together in some respects. Um, so a lot of so I guess it came in a lot of those interactions. For example, I feel like one example that sticks out in my mind is people would say you were acting light skinned, and it was a reference to like attractiveness and desirability. So if you like took a picture where you're looking like real seductive, people would say you're acting light skinned, and things like that. People place a premium on like dating someone that was light skinned. Like he found him a nice light skinned girl, etc. Things like that. So that wasn't an isolated Nigerian context. It was very much melded with the Black community at large in my high school. But I would say that was the first memory that I have of that.
Okay, so growing up in a Nigerian household, along with interacting with family members, I noticed a recurrent theme of protecting the light skin that I had. So I have other siblings, and I was the lightest one. So I was constantly told by family members oh, you're light, please wear sunscreen, don't go outside too much. And even if I got darker, they'd be oh, why are you not taking care of your skin? Oh, your skin used to look so good. I even had a family member tell me oh, you look better when you were lighter, and so things like that.
In a family context, I think certainly it's, at least in my family, it's not too big of a deal, but there are certain markers that do let me know and have informed me that colorism is still a big deal. For example, there are certain members of my family that use skin bleaching products, and it's almost even expected for older women, after they've had kids, to start using skin bleaching products, because usually that's kind of the heyday of their Owambe parties where they'll usually interact with other people. So socially, it's seen as a marker of nobility and high class and in some sense maturity. Another context is also within the fact that usually during the summer and you get when the weather is rather hot and the sun is beating fiercely, if we stay out too long, sometimes there'd be comments of, you don't want to stay out in the sun for too long, or you'll get too dark, or you're getting too dark, or something along those lines. I don't think it's something that is pervasive on an everyday level, but there are certain times throughout, daily life where you're reminded that colorism is somewhat of a big deal.
Honestly, in my family, color of our skin hasn't been an issue. There's quite a range. My dad's really, really dark, and my mom is lighter than me, even though she's not light skinned. But I have never felt like the color of our skin was a significant factor within my family. I've always thought my dad was wonderful looking, my mom's beautiful. So and any of us would have been happy to have any of their skin tones, and we do. There's a big range within my siblings. So I just remembered another really significant encounter of colorism, and this from my childhood, and I think this very internalized. So I remember looking at pictures of a photo album of my dad during his university days, and whilst he was in university, he had a German girlfriend. I remember seeing pictures of them together, and I remember I was maybe 5 or 6, and I thought to myself oh, I wish my dad married her so that I'd be mixed race. In hindsight, that's very, very sad that I thought that or would even have that inclination. I remember after I had that thought, I was oh no, I'm sorry, I love my mom. But just the fact that a child at the age of 6 would think that is very worrisome.
So where did you exactly get that idea from, that being mixed race would be better?
honestly, I'm not sure where it's from. In particular, I think it's a mixture of the media. I think it's growing up in Nigeria, you always see, at least my education was very British focused. So, like, all the models of people I saw were usually white. And as a mixed race person, you're closer to European beauty standards. And so that's all part of it. And also, you stand out. At least in Nigeria, if you're mixed race, you're going to stand out, which is also another factor.
I feel like my first reaction is that I don't feel like I see it playing out all that much. The most striking, like, consistent family memory that I have related to this is my parents always saying that they really wanted me to marry a Nigerian woman, and that was a top goal for them. And they would remind me of that like every couple months or so. So I guess contrary to like prioritizing, like, I don't know, like lighter skin beauty or I don't know, things like what you would traditionally think when you thought colorism, my family has always placed a premium on like honoring our Nigerian heritage and the beauty of Nigerian people, and wanted to see that in my relationships and who I spend time with long term.
So the three eldest of us are really close in age, and so the second child, she's like the darkest out of the three of us, and then the third child is the lightest, right? And so then I'm right in the middle. And so during the winter, like, my skin color will get like close to the third, but like in high school when I did a lot of like outside sports like tennis, like I'd get really dark, and then my parents would jokingly be like, haha, you look like a Sudanese person. And so then, like, when I was in like a competition or whatever in high school, my mom was like, you should quit tennis because your skin is getting too dark and you won't look good in this color and such. And so also, like, whenever I come home, it's always like, oh, that Californian sun has burned you, and then they give you all this like stuff like, oh, put this ambi on your skin so you know your skin will fair out or whatever. So, and I think it's because like I change my melanin changes the easiest in regards to the sun. So I get a lot of the, oh, you're getting really dark, and then it's like when I get fairer, my parents are like, oh, look at you, your skin is so nice, and my auntie will be like, wow, look at you, your skin looks so good and stuff. But when I'm dark, everyone's just laughing at me, telling me I look Sudanese or Ghanaian.
Well, I think in regards to the Nigerian media, I do see a lot of celebrities and people of note using skin bleaching products. Actually, one of Nigeria's most popular celebrities is a man by the name of Bobrisky, who has made his wealth basically through skin bleaching products. Other celebrities do the same, and I think the majority of actresses and people of note, especially women that are in the forefront of Nigerian media, are of lighter complexion or do use skin bleaching products. In terms of how it's affected me personally, not really. I've never used skin bleaching products, and I think I've been pretty comfortable with my skin tone for quite some time now. So I'm pretty secure in myself, but I definitely do see there being a wide range and an acceptance of skin bleaching products within the Nigerian media conglomerate.
Well, I would say the main way I see it is in Afrobeats music videos. So usually you'll see the main like female lead will be either completely just not African at all, or they'll be like racially ambiguous. Max like probably light skin, brown skin. And then darker females will be in the back, or they'll just be like dancing, not having like an actual storyline of some kind. And how it's influenced me, I would say it just makes me like angry that even my own people can't represent us in the way that we should be represented.
So in terms of like Nigerian media, if you watch a lot of like older Nollywood stuff, you see that like the lighter skin, especially with like female lead characters and stuff, the like lighter skin girl is usually like the good character. She's the one everyone wants to root for, all this stuff. Like there's there's one movie I remember about like two sisters, and the older sister is the lighter skin, and the younger sister is much darker. And like the younger sister is like completely this horrible human being who actually kills her older sister. And I think that's a recurring motif that's been like really present in Nollywood, and also like just music videos. Though I do think like, you know, now like it seems like some male artists especially try to, you know, demystify the whole, oh, I'm being colorist, so they try to like get that token like dark skinned girl into their music videos. But then a lot of the time too, like maybe she'll have like white passing features, like she'll have like a smaller nose, or just like she just has like those white looking features, or she's really skinny, or she has like that nice like wig or weave on or whatever. So then it's almost like they're like, we just traded your skin color, but we still want those white features. And then you have people like WizKid who really just don't care about, you know, promoting the diversity and beauty of melanin, unfortunately, but that's their own problem. And in terms of like how that's influenced me, I think when I was younger, obviously I really wanted to be lighter, just because it seemed like, oh, if you were lighter, you were prettier and people liked you more and you probably had a good character. And if you were darker, you were always the butt of the jokes, and it was literally like, you are evil, lol. But now, quite frankly, it's just like, if God wanted me to be lighter, I would be lighter, but apparently he doesn't, so yeah.
I mean, underlying is this, like the root is the same for throughout these three different continents that I've lived on, which is that Eurocentric features are the most beautiful. So in that way, like looking at the source, you can say it's the same, but I think it manifests slightly differently in different places. I mean, so in Nigeria, it's particularly strong. I'd say my experience of colorism was the worst in Nigeria, because even, and it's a double-edged sword, because even my friends who are lighter skinned, whilst they receive like a lot of privileges in society, they also, especially the girls, receive like a lot of male attention, but to the point where it's actually like disturbing. And America is a very diverse has a very diverse society, with people ranging from a whole host of shades, including having a lot of white people too. So it's not that like unique to be light skinned, not in the way that it is in Nigeria. In the UK, I was like surrounded by a predominantly white community. So, I mean, what I experienced was more racism than colorism. But I'm sure people with a more extensive experience there might have more to say about the way it plays out in the UK.
I do think that there is a huge preference towards lighter complexion people, specifically women in the Nigerian community. I think that a lot of Nigerian men, at least those that I've interacted with in the past, generally prefer women of lighter complexion, even if you account for the other physical features. So I do think there's a preference towards women with a lighter complexion. Also, I also know that people, especially women that are too dark, are often undesirable, and they're often labeled as stupid. There tends to be an implicit bias against women that are dark skinned, and they're just from whatever reason. But there is generally a preference towards lighter complexion women.
So with guys, the colorism amongst other Nigerians, like in the diaspora, is very apparent. Whether they want to consciously admit it or not, like they've all been subconsciously, whatever, like educated to believe that lighter skin is better. And I mean, can you really blame them? Because also girls are like made to think that way. But usually it's like, oh, they look at like, you could literally show them twins. Let's just use like the example of twins, but one literally is just like 2 shades lighter. And regardless of them holding like the exact same values, they probably more than likely rate the light skinned twin like more attractive than the dark skinned twin, which is ridiculous, but like that's unfortunately just how it is. And like here in California, the colorism problem seems to run deep with Nigerians. I don't really know why. In Kansas City, I don't know. I think there's still a sense because we all lived at home still, so it's kind of like impress your parents or whatever. So in general, like of course they like stuck more with, oh, like we like Igbo girls or whatever, but there was a trend in like, oh, they preferred the lighter skin Igbos. Like we had a cousin, she's not really our cousin, who is literally like white passing even though she's completely Igbo. Like she, like in high school people thought she was white, right? And so like if you, and the thing is, she's a very reserved girl. She's quiet. Like, she doesn't really like to talk to people. And she's aware that she's white passing. And, like, at parties, the amount of guys that will just, like, flock to her, you would think that the rest of us didn't exist, right? Because then we become, oh, we're too dark for them or whatever. And I think it also just kind of goes to, like, one thing that I've also noticed with, like, our parents' generation and just kind of older generations, and where, like, the guy is always darker than the woman in like most relationships, right? So then like the darker you are as a Nigerian girl, like the more like the more you realize, if you're like a heteronormative cis Nigerian woman, you realize like your pool of who you can actually date or interact with or who will find you attractive within the Nigerian or even African community gets really, really small the darker you become, because they're really not going to bring home a girl darker than them, because their mom will probably be like, oh, this is what you brought home, like your kids will be so dark. They want their kids to be lighter, and unfortunately that's just how it is right now.
So I think more so in college than in high school, I noticed that Nigerian guys are one of the most known, if not the most known, out of like the African guys for dating white girls, mixed girls, just any girl that's not black. If she is black, then she has to look like racially ambiguous or like passing as mixed, light skinned. And I think on the flip side, like most girls want a darker skinned guy. And I think one of my like most like blatant interactions with this like ideology was with one of my brother's friends. He was half Nigerian, and he's very adamant that he will not date a black woman. So I talked to him about it, just trying to like figure out why he is so strong on his stance, and he was just like, oh, I'm not dating a darkie. He used that term. He said like black women, they're just like, the black women that he's around are like ratchet, even though like his mom is around. Like Daniel is my brother, and like obviously he sees like us, like me and my sisters, and we're obviously not ratchet. Multiple examples, and he said like, oh, the darkest he'll go is like Gabrielle Union, but he prefers like whites and Hispanics, which is a common sentiment amongst like Nigerian men.
Well, yeah, I do certainly think that there is an influence of colonialism on the mindset of Nigerians as it pertains to um, Nigerian ideals of beauty. I know definitely like Eurocentric standards are promoted. So a thing that's very common is for young Nigerian girls to ask, their mom to straighten their hair or relax their hair, which is something that I saw with my little sister growing up. I also think that this idea of being tall and slender is also very Eurocentric and comes from our past grapples with colonialism. Whereas most African women, at least that I've observed, tend to just be naturally predisposed to a curvier shape. I think lastly, the colonial mindset of just being lighter in general is also very pervasive. There is, I guess, as I said many times before, there is a general preference towards lighter skinned women, and we do see that, in my opinion, as a result of this Eurocentric beauty standard that's been promoted since the beginning of colonialism in Nigeria.
So I think like this generation, especially like the strong, independent women of this generation, and I see like upcoming generations, and maybe like the previous generation, not our parents' generation, have really started to like think critically of how colonialism has affected how we perceive ourselves and like what we categorize as beauty and such. Um, as for our parents' generation, I actually think like our parents in America are actually maybe not so much thinking critically about like how the British ended up forming their views on beauty, unfortunately, but I think they're starting to understand like colonialism because now they're in a context where it's like it's not only black people, but there's also white people, and white people do like have a very colorist point of view as well, and they see how it affects them. So I'll use like my parents for example, because even though they pulled a lot of that colorist nonsense on the eldest three of us, like with our youngest two, like our youngest sister's actually the lightest out of all five of us, and the fourth, she's 10, she's the darkest out of all of us. And there was a moment when the youngest was born that like people would just like they would never tell our the fourth child when she was like 5, right, that she was cute anymore, and everyone would be like, oh, she's so, to the youngest, oh, she's so cute, she's so light, look at all this stuff. And I think they're like, my mom was just like, what do you mean, like, is she just not cute because she's darker than so ben, like Chisom is darker than so ben? And I don't know if like she sat down and really thought about how she did it to us, but she is pretty like, oh, like she'll tell Chisom, oh, your skin is very nice, like, which is something she didn't afford us. But like I think she's starting to realize like how like you need to reaffirm that like your melanin is beautiful no matter what shade. I mean, like that's how God made you or whatever, and that she's been doing that. And hopefully I hope this like starts like I think that like the effect like thinking about this will trickle up instead of trickle down. So like our generation will really force like the previous generations to critically think about it as well. And finally, like another point is that like I think also one problem is like I'll just talk about Igbo people, but like oh this stereotype that like southeasterners, Nigerians are lighter skin, right? And this was before the British came, and therefore it was very beautiful and stuff. So like people will argue that like oh well I mean the Igbos were British, the Igbos were light skinned before British came anyway. It was beautiful in our culture. It was X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z. Well, first of all, none of them lived during that time. Like everyone that was alive before British colonialism is dead. So they really don't know. And they use it as an excuse to be like, oh, that it's been there since the beginning, which I highly doubt that it has been. And I mean, like, what? I mean, unfortunately, the stereotype of Igbos being lighter skin, yeah, some are, but also, like, that's due to a lot of bleaching anyways. So it's like a problematic stereotype, and it's like regardless of if we were lighter skinned before the British, which blah blah blah, some people were, but that doesn't mean that like the British didn't affect how we began to perceive ourselves, or how oh you know the smaller nose is seen as attractive versus like the bigger nose, which is like the African trait, or like how big lips we're not in, or all this nonsensical stuff that these people have infected us with.
So I've noticed that many Nigerians don't seem to recognize the magnitude of what it meant to be colonized by the British, and one way that's kind of like materialized is in how they see lighter skin as better than darker, and with the whole bleaching trend and the normalization of bleaching, even though like the side effects of it are so terrible, but having lighter skin is deemed as worth it.
So feel like the closest I've come to seeing Nigerians grapple with colorism or seeing discourse of that sort was last winter break when I went to Nigeria to visit my family, and some of my cousins and I had went to a grocery store, and they had an entire wall of products dedicated to skin lightening products and like skin bleaching products and stuff. And I remember asking one of my cousins about it. He was just like saying that's how it is. And I don't know, it was just like, it was super shocking for me. I just wasn't expecting, but I feel like it makes sense in context. That's just not that surprising in context is a better way to say it. But I feel like apart from that, I haven't been privy to, or maybe I haven't sought out as much as I should, discourse around colorism within like the Nigerian American community and with my family in Nigeria that were born there and have been raised there as well. And for the second part of the question, do you feel like Nigerians have come to terms with the effect that colonialism has had on how we place? If come to terms means recognition and understanding, yes, but maybe that, but then again, I feel like the majority of the Nigerian Americans Nigerians that I've come into contact with that have given commentary on colorism or have spoken about it have been at Stanford, which may not necessarily be representative of Nigerians as a whole and their thoughts and opinions on colorism. How we place an emphasis / admiration on those of lighter skin. So maybe the short answer to that is, for the people that I've spoken to, yes, they have come to terms with that as a reality. An undesirable reality, but a reality nonetheless.
Okay, so I mean, that's a very broad question. So firstly, you have to break the question down. Who are Nigerians? Of course, there are people in Nigeria who realize the root of colorism in society, who understand that there are Eurocentric ideas and ideals of beauty that came from colonialism, but also are very, very vibrant in our media today. So there are people that acknowledge that. I don't want to disparage all Nigerians and say that there's absolutely no awareness that that's the case. However, in practice, I guess when it comes to the question of people coming to terms with it and then trying to redress it, it's difficult, because whilst in the US, Black people are told they aren't beautiful, in Nigeria that's not the case. I guess there's Black features aren't looked down on in the same way that they are in the US. I mean, because everyone's Black. It was never a bad thing to be dark or to be darker in Nigeria. It's just better to be lighter. So I don't know what it means, what coming to terms with means, but I think if that means taking action to mean that this imbalance in what we see as beauty is redressed, then that would mean, looking at the books that children read, looking at the TV shows and the adverts that they're exposed to, and trying to, I don't even know what that looks like, because the international media has such a huge effect on the minds of Nigerians that it almost seems like we can't control it. So I don't really know what it would mean for Nigerians to come to terms with this, but I feel like there are people who are aware of the roots of why lighter skin is seen as more beautiful, but that doesn't necessarily influence actions and attitudes.
think as it relates to politics, as it relates to, well, yeah, I think politics is the main one. I don't think skin color is of any bearing. I think the political nature of Nigeria is in general very corrupt. So it's kind of independent of whatever shade you belong to. I do think media-wise, it certainly does take a toll. When I grew up in Nigeria, there was a comedy show that we used to watch, and it had the main character was Baba Sue, and the defining feature of Baba Sue was that he was extremely dark. He was actually naturally dark, but producers of the show actually decided to color his face with tar just to kind of highlight the fact that he was dark. And he was also very, very stupid. So there was a direct correlation between having very dark skin and having a low intelligence. So I do think media-wise, there is a lot of barriers for darker skinned people, especially women, to overcome. I think romantically it's somewhat the same. Unfortunately, we are still kind of grappling with our understanding of beauty standards because of our previous run-ins with colonialism. And I think that romantically, women sometimes feel pressure to bleach their skin in order to find a romantic partner. And I see that echo a lot, and especially the older generation, not wanting their daughters to go out in the sun for too long or wanting to play sports because it can darken their skin. So I think that politically, there's no effect, but media-wise and romantically, there's a huge, huge effect, specifically towards women, but in general as well.
So I think having darker skin definitely holds you back romantically because it's considered like normal for a guy to say, "I want a light-skinned girl," and for the reverse, it happens to guys, but like not at the same magnitude. I think definitely when you're a dark-skinned Nigerian girl, black girl, your options are just limited based on the fact that there's so much like self-hatred in your fellow black man that he can't see the beauty in you, even though it's just like you're a couple shades darker than someone else, and for some reason that's like a breaking factor. In terms of professionally, obviously there's stigmas about darker skinned women of being like aggressive, and all those things, which also plays into the whole romantic life. So yeah.
Okay, so that's very interesting. I think it plays out in a very interesting way in Nigeria. I don't think so. Whilst, for example, in the US or in the UK, being lighter skinned makes you more, pliable, more acceptable. That's not the case in Nigeria at all. I think maybe the one realm with which it would help people advance would be in terms of women and marriage and having romantic partners. But beyond that, I don't think it's a prerequisite to getting better opportunities in society. In fact, I think lighter skinned people, well, actually, there are lighter skinned people who are very much Nigerian, but I'd say mixed race people have to almost prove their Nigerianness or their fit for the society more than their darker skinned counterparts. And on top of that, like being of mixed race also sort of has the connotation of being weaker, especially when it comes to men. I'm not really sure how that plays out, all the exact nuances in society, but I don't think it's an advantage politically, but definitely in the realm of visual things such as the media and romantic partners, yes.
Yeah, there's an advantage being lighter skinned in Nigerian communities. First of all the aunties are gonna like you regardless. Like, you're the pretty one, you're the one they'll be talking about your wedding. Like, you have all the options because all of them want to marry their sons to you because you're lighter than all of them, right? And I feel like also, this is like based off what I remember, like Kansas City, like the lighter you are, like the less people expect you to be like, let me not say smart, but it's like your beauty makes up for it. So it's like, oh, it's like, it's okay. She'll marry like a rich doctor. She'll marry, Chioma's son who's going to be electrical engineering. Whereas like when you're dark skinned, it's kind of like, oh, you'll get married one day, but no one is over here trying to put you with their sons until like, oh, you get into Stanford, or like you're actually like in medical school and they're like, oh, do you want to marry my blah blah blah, my son, my nephew, my grandson, all of a sudden, because like I feel like when you're darker skinned, you have to actually become successful. And it's really sad, I think, but like you have to become successful. And then even like within Nigerian media, let's be honest, like the lighter skin you are, like the more opportunities you get to like represent the face of like Nigeria or whatever community. Look at the last couple of Miss Nigerias like that have been in like the US whatever, like not this year, but I think like a year or two ago, like really, really light skin. But I mean, excuse my language, she was like she wasn't very intelligent. Like she had her character was pretty blah, right? Which is like, and I remember my mom being like, "This is what you chose to represent Nigeria. Like, this is ridiculous." And she like, my mom pointed out, oh, like they always go for lighter skinned girls instead of girls that can represent us with pride and all this stuff. And you see other countries like Ghana or whatever, or Jamaica, who bring out these dark skinned, intelligent, well spoken like individuals, and you're just like, is this all it means to be Nigerians? Because like low key, we succeed, as my mom says. Wherever there's a Nigerian, there is success. If there's no Nigerians there, you should run away, right? And it's so sad that we constantly use like light skins to like, oh, whatever, and like they like Nigerian society fetishizes them, which is problematic like in itself. Like fetishizes like this light skin or whatever, gives them advantages that they don't always deserve. Not to say that every light skin like Nigerian doesn't deserve what they get, but like there's just so much privilege in being light skinned. Finding a husband will be easier for you. If you want to go into like music or movies or just like any sort of media, it will be easier for you because everyone will be like, oh, you're the one with the fair skin, you're so pretty. I mean, just like living, I feel like will be easier for you, just because, oh, everyone's like, oh, you have such nice skin. They expect like nothing bad to happen to you, but being darker skin, like you have to work twice as hard, in all honesty. And the darker you get, honestly, not to say pity, but like the more my heart goes out for you, because like you have to become really, really, really talented for people to notice and admire you. And even then, they're never going to admire the skin that you're in.
So the context that I'm most familiar with is the American one, and I feel like when I'm thinking about that, I tend to group in terms of like the categories that you laid out, the politically, in media, and romantically. I tend to group Nigerians with Black Americans, somewhat. And when I think about that, particularly like the experiences of Black and African women, it definitely holds like colorism holds them back in all of those facets, like across the board. So if you like look at media representation, I don't look too much, like I don't spend that much time like looking at like things like fashion magazines, etc. But I like, even from seeing stuff on Twitter, I just know that like in terms of representation is very much skewed towards white and lighter skinned women at large. And even when there is a Black woman, tends to be light skinned. Even when there is a dark skinned woman, probably tends to have straight hair. So like you can kind of see like the sliding scale there. And then the same thing plays out romantically, I think, in terms of like the glorification of light skinned women. And I feel like I don't have that much observation data to back up the career and political side of things, but I feel like there's likely to be spillover there, based upon how colorism plays out in other aspects of our society and of American life. Yeah. And I guess the corollary to that is that it's much less of an impact for men. I feel like dark-skinned men don't have not nearly the I guess the amount of disadvantages, like their skin does not hold them back as much. Well, not nearly as, let me not phrase like that. In terms of the impacts of colorism, as a dark-skinned man, you're not facing as much of, like, it's not as much of a detriment to your progress and to your prosperity as for a dark-skinned woman, if that makes sense.
So I think in terms of like how our parents view colorism and that whole conversation is probably not going to change much because I feel like they don't really see it as a big deal. But I think the current generation is definitely taking like the power back and like learning to love themselves more, especially with the girls. But I think people are better at seeming like they love themselves, but their actions don't necessarily match their rhetoric.
Do you care to explain that?
So a guy could say, "Oh, I love Nigerian women. I love my culture." Like he can seem about it, but at the same time, when you see his dating history, the melanin is deficient. So it's not really reflective of what he's been preaching and like the mask he wears in public.
I think the primary difference that I see, and maybe this is partially because of the age of Twitter and us being hyper connected with each other and with other people within our generation, but just the willingness to address and recognize colorism as an issue. Whereas growing up with my aunties, uncles, with my parents, it was just never a topic of conversation that I saw. And I guess a caveat to that is I didn't have that much exposure to Nigerian media. I've forgotten all my experience with Nigerian film, so maybe just my memory is failing me. But I don't know. The primary difference to me is the discourse and the recognition, as well as, and I think this also comes with the Twitter generation and social media exposure. But I definitely see a lot more intentionality in terms of affirming and recognizing the beauty and importance and strength of dark-skinned women within our community and within the Black community at large.
Okay, so generational differences, honestly, I don't think it's changed that much. I think, lighter skin is still seen as more beautiful and was seen like that in the generations past. The key difference that I've identified actually really though is between men and women. Men seem to be, or like young men still seem to be caught up in this idea that lighter skin means more beauty, whereas I'm seeing a lot of young women really reclaiming their self-worth and uplifting themselves and others who have darker skin and acknowledging that all shades are beautiful and dark skin is just as beautiful as lighter skin. But yeah, the key distinction I find is between boys and girls. Well, boys, because I think that's an immature way of viewing beauty, and women because I feel like a lot of girls and females I know have opened their eyes and are empowering each other.
I think there is certainly a generational difference in terms of how we approach beauty. I think our grandparents' generation, because they weren't really exposed to Western media as much as we were, despite the fact they were in colonialism, still saw the beauty in Nigerian and African features in general. Whereas our parents' generation, because they were more exposed to that, they might be biased towards more European beauty standards. However, I think now we're kind of regressing back to our, I should say, progressing towards our grandparents' views, because now I see a resurgence in like natural hair movements and like just beauty acceptance of all different shades. So I do see that we're moving in a positive direction, and I do see people embracing the beauty and shades of all different complexions of Nigerians and Africans in general. So I think that's definitely a positive sign.
So, like I emphasized before, like I think in this generation and in the upcoming generations, like the women are really gonna push for the movement of this like fetishization of lighter skin to be stopped, mostly because we're the ones that are most affected by it. And also, I think is like, especially our generation, like we're well, Nigerians in general are very successful, and as we become more successful and you see dark skinned doctors, electrical engineers, X, Y, and Z, like I really do think like Nigerian men are gonna have to be like, why is it that I don't want this person, like even though I vibe with them, even though they're successful, even though we match on A through Z, why don't I? And I think then they're gonna have those frank conversations, and you already see it starting to happen or whatever, like with some guys, a very small minority in my opinion, regarding like colorism within our communities. And I think it differs from like tribe to tribe or whatever, because like, you know, some tribes are known for being light skinned, and like, so if you're really dark skinned in a tribe like that, your life is harder, I feel like. But I mean, it's permeant. And also I think like, especially being in the diaspora and being with other Africans from the continent, where like, for instance, Ghana banning like bleaching creams, like honestly, good job, Ghana, right? And like you talk to like Ghanaian men or like Kofi Siriboe, who is appreciating melanin, you know, defending black women, defending dark skinned women. And I think as like Nigerian men, like, you know, because they're friends with Ghanaians or whatever, and friends with Kenyans, and friends with other pro-black, pro-melanin African men, like they're gonna be like, okay, this is a problem that we have in our society. And as they see their Nigerian girls getting snatched up and wifed up by these other African men, then they're really gonna have to sit and be like, why is this happening? What's wrong with us? And then they're gonna have to be like, oh dang, like I need to stop being colorist. Melanin is beautiful in all of its shades. Obviously, that's why God made it, essentially. And I mean, we came first. So dark skin was the original skin. But the point is, like, I really do think also being in the diaspora, being around other like pro-black, pro-melanin, pro-dark skin, like African men, shout out to the Ghanaians again, like really makes you appreciate your melanin, because sometimes, like, especially for girls, dark skinned girls, sometimes it feels like, am I crazy? Am I creating a problem that doesn't exist? And Nigerian men will convince you that you are crazy and making a problem that doesn't exist. They'll just be like, it's my preference, man. I don't really like whatever. And you're just like, but all the girls you like are like light skin. And then they're like, it's just a coincidence, right? But then you see like these like Ghanaians or like Kenyans or whatever who are like, you know what, like, your skin is gorgeous, and there is a colorism problem, and Africa needs to address it, Nigeria needs to address it. And you're like, dang, okay, Kwabena. And you just like learn to appreciate your melanin by being around other people. But I don't know if that will trickle up to our parents' generation completely, mostly because A, they don't like Ghanaians or other Africans, it seems like, and B, you know, they have a hard time letting go. But I do think like being in the diaspora, not being in Nigeria, probably helps with the problem, because the colorism within the country is ridiculous, more so than like just not being in the country. So I think there's hope.
So, in the end, there is still hope that this societal ill of colorism will with time leave the people of Nigeria, both at home and in the diaspora. This creates the much-needed space for an equal appreciation and celebration of all variations of Nigerian melanin, a space that the soul of Nigeria truly needs.